The year was 1812. Europe was burning, and one man stood at the center of it all. A man so feared, so brilliant, that kings trembled when they heard his name. But here's the terrifying part. If just a few moments in history had gone differently, there's a chance the entire world today would belong to one man. Napoleon Bonaparte. How did a short outsider from a tiny island almost conquer the planet? And what dark obsession pushed him to keep marching, even when millions were dying around him? Because the deeper you look into Napoleon's story, the more it stops feeling like history and starts feeling like a warning. One hook, 00 to 015. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that all of Europe has fallen to a single emperor. One man controls armies larger than anything the world had ever seen. One man decides who lives and which nations disappear forever. That man was Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who almost ruled the world. But what made him so unstoppable, and what finally destroyed him? Backstory and context. The story begins far from the glittering palaces of Paris, on a rocky island called Corsica. The air smelled of salt and gunpowder. Villages whispered with rebellion. And in 1769, a child was born into chaos, Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't tall, he wasn't charming, and he wasn't even truly French. People mocked his accent. His classmates humiliated him. Some called him an outsider, others called him strange. But behind those cold eyes, something dangerous was growing. An obsession with power. At night, while other boys slept, Napoleon studied war by candlelight. Ancient battles, Roman emperors, conquerors who shaped history with blood and fire. And, slowly, he became convinced of something terrifying, that he was destined for greatness. But that was only the beginning. France itself was collapsing. The streets of Paris echoed with screams. Crowds dragged nobles through the mud. Heads rolled beneath the guillotine. The French Revolution had begun, and in the chaos, Napoleon saw opportunity. Cannons exploded through city streets. Smoke filled the air. The smell of burning wood mixed with blood and rain. While politicians argued, Napoleon acted. Young, fearless, ruthless. At only 24 years old, he crushed enemies with terrifying precision. Suddenly, France had a new hero, a military genius, a man who could turn hopeless battles into miracles. And people began asking a chilling question. Was Napoleon saving France or preparing to rule it? Three main storytelling. Then came Italy. Napoleon marched into battle with starving soldiers wearing torn uniforms. Most of Europe expected him to fail. Instead, he unleashed something the world had never seen. Speed, chaos, precision. His armies moved like storms. Entire enemy forces vanished before they understood what was happening. One Austrian officer reportedly said, "Where we expected one army, there were suddenly three." Napoleon didn't just fight wars. He psychologically destroyed his enemies. And everywhere he went, his legend grew darker. Villages shook beneath marching drums. Church bells rang in panic. Smoke rose from battlefields littered with frozen bodies. Yet somehow, people admired him, feared him, worshipped him, because Napoleon offered something irresistible: glory, purpose, power. Soon, France wasn't enough anymore. Napoleon wanted Europe, and Europe was falling fast. Italy, Austria, Prussia, one after another. Kings surrendered, empires collapsed, and then came the moment that shocked the world. Napoleon crowned himself emperor. Not a pope, not a king, himself. Inside the grand cathedral of Notre Dame, candles flickered across gold walls as thousands watched in silence. Even the Pope sat helplessly nearby. And before the eyes of Europe, Napoleon took the crown into his own hands, as if he were declaring, "I answer to no one." What happened next still fascinates historians today. because from that moment forward, Napoleon no longer behaved like a man. He behaved like destiny itself. His empire grew enormous. Millions lived under his control. Maps of Europe were rewritten again and again. Some believed he was creating a new world order. Others believed he had become addicted to conquest. But no matter how powerful he became, it was never enough. That hunger inside him kept growing, and eventually, it led him toward the disaster that destroyed everything. Russia. The invasion of Russia became one of history's darkest nightmares. More than 600,000 soldiers marched east beneath endless gray skies. Horses thundered across muddy roads. Cannons rattled through forests. At first, Napoleon believed victory was inevitable, but the Russians had a terrifying strategy. They kept retreating, burning everything behind them: fields, villages, food supplies. Nothing remained, only ashes and silence. Then winter arrived, not ordinary winter, a brutal, merciless cold that felt almost supernatural. Men froze while standing, fingers turned black. Starving soldiers ate dead horses to survive. Eyewitnesses described roads filled with frozen corpses stretching for miles. The wind itself sounded like screams, and still, Napoleon pushed forward, because he refused to believe he could lose. But that was only the beginning. Then came Moscow. Napoleon entered the city expecting surrender. Instead, he found emptiness. Silent streets, abandoned homes, a ghost city, and then suddenly, fire. Massive flames swallowed Moscow during the night. Orange light filled the sky while smoke choked the air. Entire districts burned to the ground. Napoleon stood watching from a distance as the city collapsed into ash. Some historians still debate who started the fire, but one thing is certain: that moment changed everything, because now the emperor who almost ruled the world was trapped, far from home, surrounded by winter, with a dying army, and what happened during the retreat became pure horror. For climax/biggest reveal, the march back from Russia was hell on earth. Snowstorms blinded entire columns of soldiers. Men collapsed and never stood again. Wolves followed the army through the darkness. Cannon wheels froze solid. Thousands vanished overnight. Some soldiers reportedly hallucinated from hunger and cold. Others abandoned their friends just to survive one more hour. And in the middle of this nightmare, Napoleon remained eerily calm, cold, silent, almost detached from human suffering. That's what terrified people most. Not just his ambition, but his willingness to sacrifice endless lives for victory. By the time the survivors escaped Russia, the greatest army in Europe had been destroyed. And suddenly, the world smelled weakness. Enemies closed in from every direction. The empire began collapsing, but even then, Napoleon refused to surrender. He escaped exile, returned to France, and for one final moment, Europe panicked. The emperor had returned. Imagine the fear. Imagine hearing that the man who conquered nations was marching back toward power again. It sounded impossible, like a ghost returning from the dead. But then came Waterloo. Rain soaked the battlefield. Mud swallowed boots and horses. Cannons roared through smoke-filled skies. And after years of conquest, Napoleon finally fell. Defeated, broken, alone. The man who almost ruled the world lost everything, or did he? Because even today, his shadow never truly disappeared. 5 ending plus, takeaway. That's what makes Napoleon Bonaparte so disturbing. He proved that one person, with enough intelligence, ambition, and obsession, can reshape the fate of entire civilizations. Millions died because of his dreams. Empires vanished. Borders changed forever. And yet, people still admire him. Some see a genius, others see a tyrant. Maybe he was both. But perhaps the darkest question is this: if Napoleon had won in Russia, If Waterloo had ended differently, would the world today belong to him? And how many modern leaders still dream of becoming another Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who almost ruled the world? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more dark historical mysteries and untold stories. And comment below. Do you think Napoleon was a hero, or one of history's most dangerous men? And if you want to uncover another terrifying chapter of history, watch the next video now, because some stories from the past are far more dangerous than they appear.